Hello, and thank you for tuning in again to another episode of the Book and Lounge podcast. In this episode, we are discussing memoirs, Libya, Gaddafi, the responsibilities of writers to chronicle our history, grief, exile, and everything in between. I'm your host, Jacqueline, and I'm joined by Katrina and Taiwo to discuss the issues raised in this month's book. Let's jump into the conversation. We're here to talk about The Return by Hisham Matar. So it's a memoir about his life in Libya and outside of Libya, and his quest to find out what happened to his father. So his father was a member of the Libyan government before Gaddafi took over and moved to Cairo and then set up opposition to Gaddafi, and then from Cairo was extradited back to Libya by the Egyptian government, and then he was in prison, and then nobody knows what happened to him after he ended up in prison. So the book is basically about the son trying to find out whether his father actually is still alive or whether he's dead. And so it jumps back and forth between his childhood, his university years, and the now in Libya, basically after the fall of Gaddafi. So it's very well written, but I'm curious to find out what you guys thought about it. So I'll start with you, Katrina, given as you didn't join us for the book club.
Yes, I enjoyed it. You said about how it jumps around, and I read half of it before I went on holiday, and then I had to finish it since I've been back, and quite quickly finished the rest of it last night. In a way, it's difficult to follow the thread of it all, but in another way, I find that's a bit irrelevant. It doesn't really matter that you can't quite always play, sort of which bit came first and where's he now. I just love the way it's written. I love the way he manages to explain how difficult it is to live for years not knowing whether someone's alive or dead, not knowing whether to mourn them or to fight to free them, and all the conflicts that set up in him because it happened, the beginning of it was when he was still pretty young. I just think it's beautifully written, and it gives you lots to think about. I kept pausing because, I don't think many of us have had the traumas that he's talking about, but everybody's had their own issues at one time or another. And the way he describes things, it made me think back and think, it sort of resonated with things when in my life I've had to deal with things that are hard. Yes, I found it very, very interesting to read.
I agree with Katrina. I have to point out that where you both use the words jumping about or jumping back and forth, I have to correct you both. It's about past and present narrative shifts, because your words seem to be critical, whereas mine are more that, if you're in a body of water like a river and it's flowing, if you flow with the river, then, there's no problem. Even if you're drowning, you just, let go. And as Katrina said, you let go and you just allow the words, the lyrical words, because it's written in a very lyrical way, to flow over you. And so the whole idea of past and present is not a major issue. Also, it kind of reflects, as I think about it, his grief, because grief isn't linear, is it? So that might be part of the reason why it shifts narrative between the past and the present. But that didn't hinder me from enjoying the book at all. I think it actually won the Pulitzer Prize for memoir, and someone was calling it the literature of witness. So it's very well written as a memoir about the disappearance of a loved one and how that impacts the protagonist as well as the whole family. Yeah, it's very well written.
I'm going to have to disagree with you about your narrative shift. I'm still going to call it going back and forth. And because I'm being critical about it, because for me, that's a bit that just did not work for me with this book. I like how it's written in the language that he uses. I like his style of writing, but the jumping from today, talking about what happened today, and then next thing you know, he's talking about when he was 16. And then I wasn't really sure where I was at any given moment when I started a new chapter. Even within the chapters, I still wasn't, I'm like, okay, so where is he now? How old is he now, roughly? And what period is he talking about right now? It just did not work. And it's a shame because I actually really liked his style of writing. And I wish that he had been a bit more linear in even if he was just linear in in the chapters rather than being linear all the way through. So I struggled with it, and I think I was getting towards the end. I was like, okay, so I'm really, you're just saying the same things over and over again, but at different periods of time. And I feel like and I get it, and I get why it's written the way it is, because it's his everyday. This is probably how he lives because he doesn't know. He's always going back and thinking and trying to work out what's happened to his father. And he's probably always jumping back to memories of when he was young, when he was in school, and all of that. And I get that. But I still feel that maybe it could have been edited better. I struggled with the going back and forth. But I think he's a good writer.
Mm. No, the way Taiwo just, what did you say, shifts of time shifts or
Narrative
something.
shift.
I that's much better because the only reason that it bothered me at all was because I was going to have to discuss it on this podcast, and it suddenly I realized that much as I was enjoying it, the whole process of his campaigning for his father and everything, if we needed to discuss that, I wasn't as clear about it. It's sad, but it's gives you so much to think about as you read it.
The way he's written it, he's representing how grief and memory work because you're never really completely over it. And then the memories just fleet in and out of your life, in and out of your everyday. That's how the book reads.
And also your coping mechanisms, they ebb and wane, don't they? Sometimes they're more effective than other periods. Sometimes you're in the full flow of a full-blown grief, and other times it's like you're fine, until you're no longer fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a reflection of the intimacy as regards the relationship between him and his father, members of his family, his immediate family, and his extended family. They all seem to be very close. And the loss of the main breadwinner, the patriarch, had a devastating impact on them.
So, how do you think the role of exile and belonging affect his identity and his relationship with Libya? In fact, I think that question really applies generally anyway to people who've left their countries. How does exile affect people's sense of belonging and their relationships with the countries that they've left, especially if they've left in circumstances similar to his?
I was thinking in terms of a reason that the person leaves his or her native land, and the circumstances as dictated by probably the reasons. It can be traumatic or it can be voluntary, and the timing as well seems to be critical in the life of the individual. Because if you're leaving during your formative years, or you've just completed some of those formative years, then it can have a much bigger impact than if you've left as a fully formed adult. Maybe you're in your late 20s, early 30s. You have an idea of who you are already, and the circumstances of your leaving and the reason that you left could determine how you deal with being away from a place that you may or may not long to be. And as to whether you're in that frame of mind of, I'm just here, wherever here is, on a temporary basis, home is back where I came from, or whether you just put down roots and say, no, I won't be going back, or this is my home now.
I think if you're pushed and you really didn't leave voluntarily, I think it probably, your relationship with home is probably more impacted and is probably more nostalgic than someone who's left voluntarily and they've already fully grown and as you said, Taiwo, they already know who they are. Your relationship with home, I think it's less complicated in that situation compared to someone who's left very young or someone who's just all of a sudden had to get up and then leave. And maybe it's easier for someone who's voluntarily left than someone who's been forced to leave, which is the situation that he finds himself.
Also, your agency as well is a factor, wouldn't it be? Because if it's your mother or your father that is a, let's just say,
Mhm.
political dissident or in some kind of role of opposition to a regime or authority of some sort, then it's indirect, isn't it? It's not something that you necessarily have done yourself. It's something that those who have authority over you, your parent, your mother, your father, to get at this particular individual, you also have to get at their family. To threaten them may not be sufficient. If you threaten their family, that may be the thing that will enable you to have some control over them. So the reason that you have left, if it's not necessarily as a result of you doing anything, that may also have an impact on you.
Before reading the book, what did you guys know about Libya?
It's just one word, isn't it? Gaddafi. Okay, two
Okay.
words. Gaddafi, camels. That's it.
Where do the camels come in? Because he used to ride camels.
Sand, isn't it? The Sahara is their main means of transport, wealth.
Katrina, did you know much about Gaddafi before reading this book, or Libya even?
Not a great deal, no, not really. I think Gaddafi, people see him in different ways, don't they? Over here, very bad reputation, although I hadn't realised until reading this how Tony Blair and co have been cozying up to him. But of course, in Africa generally, he's not always seen in quite such a negative way. I mean, he's given a lot of money to a lot of things. My father, who I don't think he actually met Gaddafi, but he certainly used to go to Libya sometimes because he travelled a lot for his company. He just used to say the man's mad. So,
A lot of people did.
yes, exactly. A lot of people did, but then you do get different impressions. And that comes across towards the end in The Return as well, where he's talking about Tutu criticizing being unusual amongst African people for criticizing Gaddafi. I've never really read up or anything to have an opinion of my own. Clearly, for this family, he was a very negative influence, and obviously, some of the things going on were very, very unpleasant. But
Mm.
that's not unique across the world, is it?
And like both of you, I didn't really know much about Libya. In fact, when I started reading this through halfway through, I actually said to myself, I don't think I've ever met a Libyan. And living in London, normally you've kind of come across someone from almost every part of the world, but I can't say I've ever met anybody from Libya.
I have. Many, many, many years ago, I used to know a girl who was here as a student. I didn't know her very well. She was studying maybe medicine or something, something quite high, and her mother wouldn't let her go unless she'd learnt to cook first.
Well, she has to be able to feed herself, so I guess it's
So
fair
wealthy
enough.
background.
Hmm. I suppose. Didn't, I don't know.
Coming back to something that you said, Katrina, about the perception of Libya and Gaddafi. So this book is very much about Hisham Matar and his family and his quest to find his father. And so he presents the Libyan government in very negative. He talks about people who are imprisoned during Gaddafi's rule and the kind of treatment that they got in prison. We don't really hear very much about anything else that was happening in Libya at the time about the lives of other people who are not necessarily prisoners, the social condition, the economic condition of the country. We don't read very much about that in this book. And I get that it's a memoir, it's about him and it's about his family. But I think if you just read this book, you come up with a very, would I call it, unbalanced view of Libya, given what we hear other African people saying about Libya and Gaddafi, and what the West was saying about Libya and Gaddafi. I think this is very much from a very Western perspective. Years after Gaddafi's downfall, I remember seeing a lot of articles going around where people were saying about how Libya was really the only African country where wealth was redistributed, despite the fact that Gaddafi was a dictator. He still redistributed wealth from the oil money. He had free education, and primary education was mandatory for both boys and girls. Life expectancy was 75, and I think 84% of Libyans were literate. So if you just read this book, you really don't get to learn about that. And the point I'm trying to make is, well, it's a bit problematic. On the one hand, Gaddafi was this really bad guy who did this to the prisoners and his father. But on the other hand, he was actually doing other good things. So for me, he's a bit of a polemic.
You know, when I was reading it once or twice, I was thinking about whether the father, what he was trying to achieve, whether I agreed with his approach. If you're a dissident, you can't expect the regime to be very happy with you. You're abroad somewhere, stirring up discontent or whatever. But in another way, I think the book is irrelevant to the book because it is all about, well, to me, reading it, it's about how he's dealing with this lack of his father and the uncertainty about what has happened and his role, how he should be reacting to it. And to me, it's all about that. It's not really whether his father's on the right or the wrong side of history, in a way, is irrelevant. Obviously, these sort of prisons are not exactly a good thing wherever they are in the world. But the fact that his father was abducted into one isn't perhaps very surprising when he's been working against the regime. But I just don't think it matters in terms of what the book is exploring.
I think the book just gives you a very unbalanced view. And if this is all I've read about Libya, this is, the view would be very imbalanced. And as you said, the father was trying to overthrow the government. So if you try to overthrow a government, you expect to be at some point caught and put in prison or killed.
Maybe yes and no. Given that Gaddafi was more than one thing, you can be two things at the same time. You can be good, you can be bad. I mean, there are things, like you said, that he did that seem to have been excellent in terms of the life expectancy. I mean, I never knew it was so high for Libyans at that stage. And the literacy levels is just like pretty much off the chart. So he couldn't have been 100% bad. But, I don't think any human beings are 100% bad or 100% good. He's two things at the same time. But at the same time, in terms of a balanced view, I mean, what is a balanced view? It's balanced in terms of the story that is being told, because he has a particular agenda. He's telling the story of trying to get satisfactory information about what has happened to his father. He's not really looking for his father. I think he, his brother, and his mother all know in their heart of hearts that, dad's gone. You don't go into those prisons and come out happy and whole. You normally come out 2 feet first, if you come out at all. It's a search for information about what happened to his father. So it's always going to have a particular slant. For there to be some kind of balancing quote, someone else needs to write that book, and maybe that book needs to be not a memoir. Maybe it needs to be a book on Libya, geographical location, its politics, its history, its economic background, and all the rest of it. And then you might say, okay, we now have balance. But then again, someone else would argue, well, it's not written by a Libyan, it's written by a Westerner, so therefore it's got this. So, we can't have our cake and eat it. That's what I'm trying to say. And the editing of the book, you can only edit so far for the story to be lost in the way in which you've edited. So the telling of the story, I think, which has been told very well, is from the slant of a young man who is growing up, trying to discover what has happened to his father, accepting, sometimes, other times not accepting that his dad has been killed, but nonetheless trying to find out how he was killed, but at the same time not really wanting to know, but other times wanting to know, to have the detail. So it's messy, but that's what grief is like. Grief can be very messy, and as we already agreed, it's not linear because grief is not linear.
So, do you think memoirs like this don't have responsibilities towards historical record or public discourse?
But I don't think as far as he's aware, he's telling the truth, isn't he? He's telling the truth about what happened in his family and the facts as he's found them and the explorations he did. At the end, it was all about his discussions with who is it? Is it a son of Gaddafi who
Mm.
might be able to help? It's just that he isn't presenting a different point of view. I don't think there's anything that isn't, as far as he can do it, factual in what he's writing. It's just it's his point of view. It's from where he's coming from. And responsibility, that's not what the book's about, is it? It's not about setting out, by the way, Gaddafi did all this and this, which was actually very good at the same time as he imprisoned and tortured my father. I mean, why should he write about that? I think there is a couple of points where he mentioned something that was in Gaddafi's favour. I just don't think that's what the book's about.
I think it's more to do with telling the story in a way that is responsible to the story, isn't it? So, to the integrity of the story, he seems to be responsible. As to one book, you learning everything you need to learn about Libya. No, you need to go and put in the work, put in the effort to read a number of books and from a number of different sources to find out if you really do have interest in Libya, the good and the bad and the indifferent to do with Libya, different people's points of view, Libyans and also non-Libyans, Libyans in the diaspora, Libyans that live in Libya that never left during the hard years, Libyans that are economically empowered, Libyans that maybe are much poorer. And then you can form your own opinion, which obviously might be quite subjective as well. I don't think the responsibility of one man's story of the loss of his father is such that we should expect to know everything we need to know about Libya.
Fair enough. Okay, so what ethical or emotional tensions arise from Matar's interaction with figures of power? So, for example, Self Assam, Gaddafi. He has meetings with various political figures towards the end from the Libyan government. And I think this is a time where the West were trying to cozy up to Gaddafi. I mean, he's been campaigning all these years and he's never been taken seriously. And then he has this one moment where he writes an article and then all of a sudden everybody's taking note because he's causing a lot of noise. And so he arranges meetings with members of the UK government and then also people who are involved in the Libyan government itself. How do you feel that he navigated that? And do you think that he was at some points really naive?
I do a little bit. I began to think, why is he wasting his time with them? Because to me, they were just stringing him along, stringing him along. I thought they very possibly don't even know themselves what happened to his father. I doubt if they could account for every prisoner that's ever been in that jail. And even if his father was an important one, I doubt if anybody really knows definitively what happened, except that it's very unlikely that the man would have still been alive. It was all about politics, showing they were doing something when they actually couldn't do anything, and possibly hoping to win Hisham over, because that would have looked like a bit of a coup for them if it looked like he was willing to come back and help Libya and write his books from Libya and all that. That would have looked nice for them. I think he gradually came to that conclusion himself. What I felt with him is that, yes, his father was probably dead, but that he seemed to feel a sort of duty to continue and continue and continue this effort. That it's a sort of duty he'd laid on himself out of loyalty to his father.
Because when you mentioned duty, I kept thinking, is it survivor's guilt almost? Not knowing not having had the body can interrupt the grieving process. You need the body in order to go through all the rituals of the funeral, etc., etc. And because he wasn't able to complete the grieving process as such, it kept reminding me of, that woman who husband, I think she's a Pakistani, and she married to a Brit, and her husband and daughter were here, and she'd gone to visit her mum or her relatives, and she got seized by the
You're talking
national.
about Iran. What's her name? There was a
Nazanin Zaghari.
That's it. I
yes.
couldn't remember her name. Yes, Iran. So the playbook, that's what I'm talking about. The playbook that Iran tends to use, where, I'll seize one of your citizens, and then that will force you to do something in return for me to release your citizen. It seems as if there's that playbook that is similar to what Gaddafi's son was following. But at the same time, the British government, they have their own playbook, in the way in which Miliband was saying about, noise. I smiled when I read it. You're talking about someone's life, but I can understand, it's not your father, it's not your brother, so it's politics. So you have to put some emotional distance in order to deal with these issues. It's always quite cold, but I guess really it has to be cold for you to make these calculated decisions. But that whole chapter where he compressed much of the campaigning because a lot had been kicked off as a result of triggers being triggered and noise happening and it getting as far as the Houses of Parliament and people starting to react in a certain way, it gave me the idea that you've been campaigning for many, many years, but not a lot had happened. It's when this noise reached a tipping point. For me, the issue was hope. Wherever hope was dangled as a carrot in front of him or anyone, then you're bound to explore that avenue. I can't pronounce her name, but yeah, she was naive, wasn't she? Her husband was naive at the beginning of their campaign to try and get her out. Remember,
Mm.
the governments always follow the same playbook. Don't make noise. We're doing all this and that behind the scenes. You're going to mess up the diplomatic channels and our communications. Whereas most of the time, they're not doing a lot. Or it takes some time before they realize that to get this person out or to get the information that I need, it's on me. So I don't really have a lot to lose. And so you have your own playbook. But as long as they dangle that hope in front of you, you're always going to explore every channel that is a possibility. Because maybe, just maybe, you don't want to find yourself at the end of the day saying, well, if I'd gone down that avenue, maybe I would have reached a resolution. Maybe I would have found the solution. Maybe they would have answered the questions I'm trying to find. So you always have that hope being dangled in front of you. And sometimes hope can just be like a real bitch.
I feel like there's no end. What does that suggest about truth and closure when information is missing or absent, when you don't know what's happened to the person? What does the book show about being in that situation?
I think he expresses it very well because it's such an impossible situation he's in, especially I think because he was so young when it started. What Taiwo was just saying about any hope, it's almost funny the bit where he meets the man who said he saw his father in 2002 briefly through some prison window. Is it Amnesty International or somebody wrote a report that also said, oh, there's been a sighting of him, which meant he hadn't died in the prison massacre in 1996. And then when he meets the man and shows him a photograph of his father, and they will sort of realize that actually perhaps he hadn't seen his father. And it was so real that that could happen.
Mm.
And this myth has arisen, and then they both feel upset and annoyed with each other because it's sort of crumbled apart. But it was just so real. But then these little bits of hope are what has stopped him from, I suppose, just accepting his father is dead. Because how do you accept for sure when you haven't got the body and nobody's telling you, nobody knows? To me, that's what the whole book's about. And at the end, where he quotes from the Odyssey, where he's talking about, I wish at least I had some happy man as father growing old in his own house. And he's saying how Odysseus' son is trapped. It's not so much that he's wanting his father home as that he can't get out of his home because his father might come home. I really thought that he's sort of trapped by this duty that he can't just let it go, say my father's dead and grieve. And I thought that he'd really expressed all those dilemmas very, very well.
I agree. I think as a book to show you what grief and that not knowing how it feels, he does it really well. But also, you touched on something that I really liked about the book. It's very clear that he's very literate, but his use of other literature to illustrate what he's trying to say, you'd be a bit lost if you don't know about what book is that he's referring to. But for me, I felt like that was an education anyway, because I went and then started looking things up. So I liked that he did that. And for me, those were some of the enjoyable parts of the book. But it was also quite sad at points. He presented his relationship with that he had with people, especially when he was younger, when he was in school. The one that touched me the most was when was it Benghazi, when he went back to where his grandfather was born and where his grandfather preferred to live. And then he was meeting family, and how this old man just came and sat next to him and then just started asking the same question again and again and again. And also how the relatives related with each other. Sometimes they didn't even need to say anything, but they knew what the other was thinking, they knew what was going on, and they knew what the relationship was between themselves. I found, I think what I liked most about the book was the style of writing, and also that the development of the relationships and how he presented the relationships. I don't know, what did you guys think about how he dealt with family and relations?
I did like that. I liked the way that he showed us as an insider Libyan interrelationships where family members have tight bonds. And the fact that
Mm,
he showed this level of resilience. So, despite the fact that the trauma of the loss of his father and the not knowing what had happened, and that inability to know for sure, but still, each day you wake up, as long as you're not dead, you have to get on with your life. So, you continue to put one foot in front of the other and move forward. I mean, the way in which it could never, in my view, if it's going to reflect his real life, it could never end in a way that's all tied up neatly, because there isn't ever really going to be a resolution. I mean, life is messy, and a war-like situation, or a situation where you have people being detained or disappeared into a notorious place of incarceration, where you just really don't know the numbers of people that die there. I mean, it's not like some kind of German efficient administration where they keep great records of the people that they're decimating. No, this is just Libya. They know roughly the number of people that were killed on a time of massacre, because someone, the cook, a prisoner who was doing the cooking, was given a bucket filled with bloodied wristwatches and bloodied rings and jewelry to wash, that the guards would then dispose of. So that gave an idea of how many people had been killed during a particular massacre. But records are
mm,
never kept accurately, so you never can tell. And this whole thing
mm.
about hope as well, it's almost as to say that person that said he saw his father, is like he really wanted it to be his father. And at the same time, the author himself trying to confirm that, yes, indeed, it was his father. Therefore, his father seems to have been alive beyond that massacre. Maybe he too really wanted his father to be alive, but then you kind of add one and one and you only get two. You start thinking, well, probably not. Maybe he died in the massacre. It's all that uncertainty and messiness, which, like I said, is a reflection of how life is messy, but particularly so in those kind of circumstances of being disappeared. I think it was done very well.
What do you think about the letters then? The ones that were smuggled, the ones that were written between the prisoners whilst they were in prison, the ones that ended up with the families. How do they function as a form of evidence? Because I think you said, dictators don't necessarily keep a record of who they've killed. And also the changing of family books where people have actually died and families haven't been told, but the regime has quietly gone and changed the records in. I didn't realize they were required to keep family books with records of people's births and deaths and so on.
That struck me as very French. The French have a family book, and I've got a copy of one from long way back. When you've got to have a new child, you go and you get another piece of it filled in. Whether the Italians have something similar and they sort of introduced it to Libya, or maybe it comes from somewhere else. That I imagined it, but yes, sneakily collecting them and then making a note.
I think it's cunning. You don't tell someone that their relative is dead. You just sneakily make a record in the book that he's dead. One of the women had been going to prison and taking food for years. And during all those years, the son had been dead.
It's very cruel as well, isn't it? Extremely
Mm.
cruel.
Talking about these women that used to turn up with food and so on. How is gender and family roles portrayed in the book, particularly the ways mothers and wives and women's networks respond to disappearances and political repression?
That aspect is mentioned, isn't it, of obviously the woman who was taking things for her son, and that, and also his mother's efforts to support other wives or mothers whose sons and husbands have been abducted. But what struck me was, I mean, he has a lot to say about his father and his father's relationship with him, and his father as this great charismatic figure that has, impressed himself upon him. But I didn't feel he spoke a great deal about his mother. Obviously, there's a very loving relationship between them, but I felt she must be a pretty incredible woman as well. The way she's carried on and supported her two sons. I didn't feel he had so much to say. Maybe he just couldn't find the words for that. Maybe it's easier to talk about his father in a way.
Maybe also because his father is missing. So it's easy to talk about someone that isn't there. Whereas with his mother, it may be that he feels that he doesn't have the right to speak for her, as he doesn't really have the right to speak for his brother. I mean, he mentioned in passing that his brother was married and had, I think, 4 children. But beyond that, he
Mm.
doesn't say a lot about his brother, nor how his brother copes with the absence of his father. But it's a very patriarchal society, isn't it?
He almost lionizes his father, doesn't he? Did you feel that because he's lost his father in that way, that it's a sort of immature relationship, whereas usually as we grow older, we get a bit more critical of our parents and we spot their defects as much as what we've got from them. Do you feel that that part is missing, that he's very uncritical of his father?
I think so. I think he idolizes his father, doesn't he? His father is this great guy who's done all these great things. Despite the fact that he was a dissident and he was trying to overthrow the government, you don't really get any negative views of his father. Well, apart from the fact that he spent all the money that they had. There was not really much of a criticism. And so, yes, I agree. I think he very much idolizes his father. And I think I get that because I guess his father's missing and he's not had that grown up relationship with his father.
I think you said lionize, which, yeah, I agree.
Did I
You
say
did
lionize?
at one stage. But I think in terms of being critical, it would be not impossible, but maybe difficult in terms of the memoir to then try and balance it out a bit and say, these are some of the things that I didn't like about him, how you kind of fit that into the whole narrative. It could be done.
Okay, so I guess I just want to finish by bringing it back to the state of Libya in general. So, the one that was fighting on the side of the rebels and ended up being killed, and then wanting to be buried next to his.
Freedom fighter power.
Why I bring them up is really to discuss the forces that motivate young men to join these types of movements.
I wonder whether there's an element of indoctrination or whether it's a case of I need to devote my life to freeing my people so that the life that I've known under this dictator, there are still some African countries where the population is young, the average age is below 30, but all the people have ever known is one person in power for the whole of their life. So maybe part of it is they're thinking, okay, fine, most of my life I've been spent under the authority of this particular person, but if we can remove him, then for the next generation, they'll have more maybe freedom. Maybe that's part of it. Or maybe it's just about having purpose.
There were and there are still people fighting amongst each other for power within Libya right now. And so the family were trying to advise him, well, it's futile what you're doing. Do people who join such revolutionary movements become so integrated that it's hard for them to now come back and live normal civilian lives? They feel that there's always a cause that they need to be fighting for.
Yeah, maybe that's what they know, isn't it?
Was it Nelson Mandela that said that the struggle is my life? So that becomes the purpose of your life, maybe.
Yeah, there's still no stable government in Libya, as far as I'm aware. Many people on the African continent were quite supportive of Gaddafi, and they believe that the Arab Spring that happened in Tunisia, Algeria,
Yes, I think so.
was really not as big in Libya. And even if it was, the Western powers did not take the same course of action to overthrow the leaders. So, why was Gaddafi overthrown? So, many commentators say basically because, first of all, Gaddafi was very pan Africanist. He was very anti Western and anti American until the last few years, where he then started building good relationships with the UK. But before that, he was very critical and much closer to Russia. So many argue that actually the overthrow of Gaddafi wasn't necessarily done by the Libyans themselves. It was more Western powers, so it was an opportunity to get rid of someone who was very pan-Africanist, who was doing a lot to unite African governments, and that would not work in their favor, given their interests in Africa. What are your views on that line of thought? Is there merit to it?
I think there is, but I haven't really read a great deal to know what went on. But the Western powers do usually like to meddle, and they have a sort of grievance with Gaddafi. And what was it, that plane that went down in Scotland?
Lockerbie.
That, yes, I mean, all these things, they create a feeling, I think, amongst the powerful Western and, in that case, British governments that they ought to be taking their revenge in a way.
Because I was shocked when the book described Gaddafi raising the hand of the person that is supposed to have planted the bomb, or one of the main people, as he had been freed by the Western powers. And I think he was freed on the whole idea of his dying or something, health grounds or something, wasn't it? So there's a big question mark over whether he was dying or whether it was political expedience. But then again, the whole issue of the Libyan embassy and the police officer that got killed, I think Yvonne Fletcher or whatever I think her name was.
Yvonne Fletcher, yeah. Yeah.
But then why am I surprised? Maybe I'm surprised because I'm just naive that a government, any government, seeks to preserve itself, not its citizens. So just because it's a Western government and it's kind of caught in the spotlight of media attention, it seemed quite blatant. Therefore, these things get hushed up. That these things in quote, they get hushed up every day. It's just that most of the time we don't know about them. But with the Yvonne Fletcher case, and to an extent with the Lockerbie bombing case, these were things that were in the public arena. And so we knew that to a large extent, in both cases, many people would say justice was never really served. But political expediency, why all this noise, as Milithan said? And that just made me laugh. This is how the establishment works. It seeks to preserve itself. It's not about what is in the best interest of the United Kingdom citizens. It's about what is best for us.
Are they any different to dictators then? I mean, if that's what motivates them.
Well, I don't think they are in one sense, because the dictator likes to believe that they are doing the best for the country. The government likes to believe that, and it's sort of like, in the short term, we have to do this because we need to stay so that we can do X, Y, and Z, which is so much better. I feel that's their sort of conscious thinking. What's going on subconsciously is probably a very different thing. but consciously they will claim that they need that extra time, don't they, to achieve X and Y. That never gets achieved, but there we are.
We've gone a whole episode without mentioning the biggest dictator in the world at the moment.
Good.
So, yes. So Hisham Matar's The Return, Father, Son, and the Land in Between then. How would you rate it out of 5, and would you recommend it?
I'll still give it a strong 3.5, and I would recommend it. What did you say?
I thought you finished. Sorry, I
No,
was
sorry.
just going to say I give it a 4,
Okay.
and yes, I would recommend it.
I can see. I'm
You're the
struggling here.
dissenting
I can
voice.
see the merits. I can see glimmers of brilliant writing in this book, but I just really struggled with
Glimmers,
it.
Jackie. Come
And I
on.
think,
They're more than
sorry?
glimmers.
Okay, fine, fair enough. More than glimmers. But great writing. No, he's a great writer. I give him credit for that. He really is a great writer. But he's a writer that just did not engage me. I had to force myself, despite the fact that it's really well written, to read this book. And if it wasn't for the book club, I don't think I would have finished it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because that's how I felt about James, that everybody else thought was marvelous. I think Hisham Matar is he sort of rambles on, doesn't he,
He
introspectively,
does. A bit too much.
and you either like it or you don't. I can well
Mm.
imagine it isn't for everybody, but I personally found it very, very absorbing.
So based on that, I mean, I think I would give it a 3 out of 5. And don't think I would recommend it. Having said that, I'm thinking his novels are probably better. So maybe I would say pick up one of his novels. I do want to read one of his novels just to see what he's like as a novelist. But Katrina, you've read another one of his
Yes,
books. What did you think?
well, it's very similar, but it's what's it called?
Was it fiction or
No,
non-fiction?
I'm just trying to think of the title. It's A Month in Siena. A Month in
Uh-huh.
Siena actually is in a way, it's the sequel to The Return, because it's still, he's trying to process what's happened when he visited Libya, and I think to try to put an end to to sort of accept that he won't know what has happened to his father, and to be able to accept that and to leave it. So in many ways, it's quite similar. In The Return, he talks about the National Gallery and looking at pictures. Well, of course, in Siena, there's
Yeah.
particular works of art that he wants to spend time, and he just stands and, well, he looks at them in a way that I'm like the person that he mentions who does 50 paintings in an hour, whizzing through the gallery. And he's actually made me, from reading A Month in Vienna, in Siena, he made me sort of actually try to take a different approach in galleries. So that's also a good thing. But the introspective way of writing is very similar. So I don't think you should go there, Jackie. I think I haven't read his novels. It might be interesting to read one. But the beautiful writing is there, because he does write beautifully in places, doesn't he? I think.
It does.
He does. I agree. I agree. I mean, I can't fault his writing.
I have a feeling that I'll enjoy A Month in Siena.
Are you going to pick
I
it
am.
up?
I'm going to read it.
You read the A Month in Siena, and I'll read a novel, and then we can compare notes. And with those additional items in our reading list, we've come to an end. Thank you so much for your time, Katrina and Taiwo, and enjoy the rest of the evening. And thank you so much, listeners, for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please leave us a review on Instagram, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, or YouTube. And please consider sharing the podcast with your friends, family, or anyone who may be interested. Until next time, goodbye.